The first wolf cub was under the sofa, growling at a silver hairbrush as if it had insulted his ancestors. The second wolf cub was inside the curtains, whispering that if the new nanny wore perfume, he would bite her shoe and blame the furniture. Then Leora Vey stepped into the royal nursery, and both cubs froze as if someone had opened a door to summer. The room smelled of cold stone, untouched soup, expensive soap, and the sort of despair that made servants walk softly. A nursery should have smelled of milk, blankets, and warm fur. This one smelled like a battle had taken place between grief and good manners, and grief had won by chewing the table legs. Leora stood just inside the threshold with her worn brown cloak over one arm and a basket in her hand. She was 27, an omega and nearly invisible in the royal household records. The clerk had written temporary cubminder beside her name in pale ink, as if even the title felt uncertain. She had been called from a border den house 3 days north of the capital. For 7 years, she had coaxed abandoned wolf pups out from under stoves, cupboards, hay carts, and once a priest's laundry basket. She knew the smell of frightened young wolves. She knew the silence that came after loss. She also knew the difference between a cub who meant to bite and a cub who wanted the world to believe he did. The black-gray cub beneath the sofa was the second kind. Mostly. He had one paw braced on the silver hairbrush, his little muzzle wrinkled in outrage, his blue-gray eyes fixed on Leora with the seriousness of a tiny judge in fur. The smaller cub in the curtains was pale smoke gray. Only his nose and one ear showed between the heavy blue velvet folds. His voice was muffled when he whispered to his brother, "She smells like bread. Dangerous bread." Every adult in the room went rigid. The cubs had not spoken to anyone in 34 days. Leora knew this because the old butler had repeated it 4 times on the walk from the carriage gate, each time with more despair and less hope. They had not spoken to physicians. They had not spoken to noble nurses. They had not spoken to wolf trainers, moon priests, grief tutors, 3 aunties, or the expensive she-wolf who claimed she could calm any cub with posture alone. Apparently, posture had not survived contact with the sofa. The old butler, Merritt, stood beside Leora with a list in his trembling hand. His hair was white, and his coat was black. His face had the exhausted dignity of a man who had watched 19 nannies fail and personally buried 12 pairs of ruined slippers. Behind him stood the Alpha King. Ronan Ashvale did not belong in a nursery, and the nursery seemed to know it. The fire snapped lower when he entered. The shadows stood straighter. Even the soup on the tray looked nervous. He was tall, dark-haired, and severe, with winter gold eyes and a jaw made for royal decrees, not bedtime songs. His black coat was fastened to the throat with silver clasps shaped like wolves. His hands rested behind his back, gloved and still. He looked like a king who could command armies, silence councils, and make mountains apologize for standing in the wrong place. He did not look like a father who knew where to put his hands when his cubs cried. That was the first thing Leora noticed about him. The second thing was that he had brought blankets. Not 1 blanket, not 2. A small mountain of folded blankets had been stacked near the wall, each one thick, soft, expensive, and clearly unused. There were blue blankets, gray blankets, and white blankets. There was one ridiculous red blanket with silver moons, plus a tiny fur-lined nest that looked more expensive than Leora's childhood village. A cub did not need 19 blankets. A guilty father did. Ronan's voice came from behind her, low enough to sound like stone doors closing. "You have 1 hour, Miss Vey." The black-gray cub under the sofa sneezed. He said that to the last one. She smelled like roses and fear. The pale cub in the curtain added, "And shoe polish. Bad shoe polish." Merritt inhaled so sharply the list crumpled. Ronan did not move, but the air around him changed. Leora did not turn to look at him. The cubs were watching. If she looked to the Alpha King for permission, they would know who ruled her courage. Young wolves noticed things like that. She lowered her basket to the floor, slowly. No sudden movements, no bright voice, no reaching hands. "Good evening," she said to the room. not only to the cubs. I am Leora. I brought honey bread, goat milk, and a clean brush that has never insulted anyone's bloodline. The hairbrush under the sofa received a suspicious growl. The larger cub's nose moved. The smaller cub slipped 2 inches farther out of the curtain. Honey bread? He asked. The question was not polished court speech. It came as a soft cub sound, half whine, half word, shaped by the old nursery speech young wolves used before they trusted adults. Leora had heard it in border dens for years. Most nobles heard only little yips and growls because they listened for perfect words. A patient Omega who knew cubs could understand enough, if the cub allowed it. These cubs were allowing it. That was trust opening one cautious eye. Leora lifted the cloth from her basket. Warm honey bread breathed into the cold room. It carried the scent of butter, oats, and the little den house stove where she had packed it before dawn. Under it lay goat milk in a stoppered bottle, 2 soft cloth squares, and a bundle of dried calming herbs wrapped in linen. The pale cub came out of the curtain so fast he tangled himself in it, rolled once, and landed on his back with all 4 paws in the air. Merritt made a strangled sound. Ronan took half a step forward. The black-gray cub snapped his head toward the king. No thunder. Ronan stopped. The command had come from a cub no larger than a winter pillow. The Alpha King obeyed it. Leora filed that away. The smaller cub scrambled upright and stared at her. His eyes were too large for his face. His fur stood up along one side where the curtain had rubbed it backward. He sniffed once, twice, then his whole body changed. The tension left his shoulders. His tail gave one uncertain wag. He whispered, "Mama?" The nursery became so silent that Leora heard the fire crack. The larger cub beneath the sofa froze with his paw still on the hairbrush. Merritt's list slid from his hand and landed on the floor. Ronan did not breathe. Leora felt the words strike the room like a cup falling in a chapel. Mama. Not because she was their mother. Not because they had forgotten the Luna whose scent still clung faintly to the blue velvet curtains and one worn silver ribbon tied to the bedpost. The word meant something older in the mouths of grieving cubs. Safe warmth, soft den. Someone who stayed low and did not grab. Someone who smelled like food and clean blankets and did not demand that pain stand upright for inspection. Leora sank slowly to the floor, knees tucked to one side. She placed one piece of honey bread on the carpet and slid it halfway between them. Not Mama yet, she said gently. Maybe breakfast friend. Maybe brush negotiator. We can discuss titles after nobody bites the furniture. The pale cub blinked. Then he pounced on the bread. The larger cub made a scandalized sound. Pip! We do not accept tribute from strangers. The pale cub, apparently Pip, spoke around a mouthful of bread. She is not stranger. She is warm. Bread is warm. I love bread. Leora did not laugh. She wanted to. Professional restraint had survived worse things than a philosophical wolf cub with crumbs on his nose. The larger cub crawled out from under the sofa 1 inch at a time. He was bigger than Pip, darker, and doing his best to look dangerous despite the dust on his whiskers. A strip of blue ribbon was tied around his front leg. It had been knotted carefully once, then chewed loose and retied badly. He saw Leora looking at it and tucked the leg back. No touching. No touching, Leora agreed. His eyes narrowed. No changing us. I have no plans to change anyone before breakfast. Pip looked up in alarm. After breakfast? Still unlikely. The larger cub sniffed the air again. Whatever he found there made his ears soften before he remembered to be fierce. I am Knox, he announced. Of course you are. Why of course? Because you look like someone who would name himself after night and then get stuck under a sofa fighting a hairbrush. Pip made a tiny, squeaking laugh. Knox looked betrayed by joy. Behind Leora, Merritt whispered, Your Majesty. The Alpha King's voice came after a long pause. Leave them. Merritt hesitated. But, Your Majesty, the new nanny's interview form is not complete. Knox's head snapped up. No interviews. Interviews? Smell like leaving. Pip shoved the last crumb into his mouth and pressed against Leora's skirt. Mama stays. Ronan's hand flexed once at his side. Leora could feel his gaze on her back. Heavy, shocked, hungry for hope, and terrified of it. She turned only then. The Alpha King looked exactly as he had when she entered. Cold, controlled, untouchable. Except his eyes had changed. He was staring at Pip pressed against her skirt as if the little cub had just returned from the dead. Leora lowered her voice. Your Majesty, they are tired, hungry, overwatched. If I may speak plainly, this room is too cold, the soup is too far away, and that hairbrush has been given too much authority. Merritt gave a cough that might have been prayer. Ronan's gaze sharpened. You have been here 5 minutes. 6, I think. And you have decided my nursery is wrong. No, I have decided Grief arranged the furniture. Grief is rarely good at nurseries. The silence that followed had teeth. Knox looked delighted. She bit father with words. Pip gasped. Can she do it again? Ronan heard only cub noises, but he understood the mood well enough. His eyes moved from the cubs to Leora. Most people looked away from him by then. Leora did not. Not because she was bold by nature. She had been frightened many times in her life. She simply knew that frightened cubs could smell when adults lied, and Ronan Ashvale had built a palace of control around a broken den. Someone had to say so, preferably before the hairbrush was killed. Ronan spoke at last. You will remain for 1 week. Pip cheered with a full-body bounce. Knox tried to look as if he had not also bounced. The king continued, you will follow the safety rules. You will report every change to Merritt. You will not encourage disorder. Pip crawled fully into Leora's lap. Knox dragged the honey bread cloth closer and sat on it like a guard at a treasure vault. Leora looked down at them, then back at the king. I will encourage sleep, food, clean fur, and fewer battles with grooming tools. Disorder will depend on their opinions. Pip licked honey from her sleeve. Knox muttered, her sleeve is acceptable. Ronan stared at the cubs. For the first time since Leora entered, his face cracked. Not enough to smile. Not enough to soften fully. Just enough for pain to show through the gold of his eyes. Then he turned away. Merritt, prepare a room for Miss Vey near the east wing. Merritt bent to pick up the list. Yes, Your Majesty. Ronan reached the door, stopped, and looked back once. Pip had fallen asleep against Leora's knee with honey on his nose. Knox was still awake, still guarding, but his chin rested on the edge of Leora's skirt. The Alpha King's throat moved. He left without another word. Knox watched the door close. Father smells like thunder. Leora brushed one finger over the carpet near him, not touching. Thunder usually means rain is trapped somewhere. Knox considered this with grave suspicion. Pip sighed in his sleep. Mama smells like bread. Leora looked at the cold nursery, the mountain of unused blankets, and the untouched soup. She looked at the door where the Alpha King had stood like a man locked outside his own heart. Well, she murmured, bread is a beginning. By the end of the first hour, Leora had done 3 impossible things. She had fed both cubs. She had removed the silver hairbrush from Knox's custody without bloodshed. She had convinced Pip to leave the curtains by explaining that curtains could not be trusted with crumbs. Merritt stood near the wall, clutching fresh linens to his chest like sacred texts. Miss Vey, he said faintly, the smaller cub has not eaten from a dish since the funeral. Pip looked up from the shallow bowl of goat milk. His whiskers were white. Dish is rude, lap is better. Leora placed one hand over her mouth. Knox pretended not to be interested in the goat milk until Leora turned slightly away. Then he took 3 quick laps, glared at the bowl for being delicious, and resumed guarding the ribbon on his leg. Merritt looked ready to weep. Leora did not let him. Servants crying in nurseries made cubs nervous. She set him to practical tasks instead. The soup had to go. The room needed warmer lamps. The tall chairs needed to be moved away from the walls because cubs liked low hiding places, not furniture that made every adult look like a judge. Half the blankets could stay. The rest had to be folded into a den corner instead of stacked like guilt in wool form. Merritt obeyed with the relief of a man who had waited weeks for someone to command the obvious. When he carried away the soup, Pip watched him go. Soup is sad. It has been dismissed, Leora assured him. Knox sniffed. Good. It smelled like wet rule. Leora turned her cough into a discussion about blankets. The East Wing nursery began to change before sunset. Not dramatically. Leora did not believe frightened young wolves needed dramatic improvements. They needed steady ones. She lowered the lamp flames and pulled the rug closer to the hearth. Then she placed the small nest of blankets under the window seat and left the door to her own little side chamber open. Not wide, just enough. Cubs liked exits. She did not touch the silver ribbon tied to the bedpost. She did not ask about the Luna. She did not ask why the cubs refused human shape. She did not ask why Knox flinched each time Boots passed outside. She asked whether Pip preferred goat milk warm or warmer. She asked whether Knox wanted the brush placed on probation. She asked whether the blue blanket smelled wrong because of soap, storage, or sadness. That question made both cubs go quiet. Knox looked at the blanket pile. Pip crept under Leora's skirt until only his tail showed. Sadness, Knox said at last. Leora nodded once. Then we do not use that one tonight. Pip whispered from under the skirt. It smells like her. Merritt stopped folding linen. Leora kept her gaze on the fire. Then it can stay where you can see it. It does not have to touch you. Knox stared at her for a long time. Then he dragged the blue blanket to the far side of the room. He placed it carefully on a low stool and sat facing it like a guard before a closed door. No one spoke. That was the first real progress. The second came after dinner, when Ronan returned. He did not enter like a father. He entered like an inspection. The cubs sensed it at once. Knox stiffened. Pip backed under the window seat, bumping his head on the wood and making a tiny, offended squeak. Ronan stopped just inside the door. He saw the changed room, the relocated blankets, and the empty bowls. He also saw the brush sitting on the mantel under what Leora had labeled probation, and his sons not hiding quite as deeply as before. His face gave away nothing. His scent did. Sharp hope, bitter fear, cold restraint. Leora sat on the floor with mending in her lap. She had learned that adults standing over cubs could turn even a good evening into a trial. Your Majesty, she greeted him. Pip whispered from the window seat. Thunder came back. Knox hissed. Do not call him Thunder. He will make rules. Ronan heard small growls and one squeak. His jaw tightened. Leora set the mending aside. They ate. They drank. Pip objected to soup on philosophical grounds. Knox has placed the hairbrush on probation. Ronan's eyes moved to the mantel. The brush lay there like a disgraced official. Probation. A compromise between exile and execution. Knox lifted his chin. I wanted execution. He wanted execution, Leora translated mildly. I suggested mercy. For a moment, Ronan looked at the brush as if he too might have preferred execution. Then his gaze returned to the cubs. Pip had come halfway out from the window seat. Knox sat beside the blue blanket, body tense but not hidden. Ronan took one step forward. Both cubs retreated. He stopped. Pain moved across his face so quickly that anyone less practiced in watching wounded creatures would have missed it. Leora did not miss it. She also did not soothe him. Not yet. The cubs came first. Your Majesty, she said, keeping her voice low, may I suggest something? His eyes cut to her. You already have. Repeatedly. Pip made a breathy sound that might have been a laugh. Leora continued as if the king had not just proved he could be funny by accident. Do not walk toward them. Sit near the door. Let them keep the distance. Ronan looked at the floor. It was a royal floor, polished dark wood with a thick rug over most of it. He looked back at Leora. Sit. Yes, on the floor. That is where cubs keep most of their world. Knox muttered. Floor knows things. Ronan heard only the growl. He looked at the cub, then at the floor again. Slowly, with the stiffness of a man lowering a crown into a laundry basket, the Alpha King sat. He did it badly. He sat with his back too straight, his knees arranged like a formal hearing, and his hands resting on his thighs as if awaiting judgment. Pip stared. Knox stared. Leora stared at her mending to survive. Pip whispered, "Father sits like angry furniture." Knox added, "Expensive angry furniture." Leora's needle slipped. Ronan's gaze sharpened. "What did they say?" "They are observing your posture. And? It commands respect." Knox snorted. Pip rolled sideways under the window seat. Leora cleared her throat. "From furniture." Ronan closed his eyes. It was not a laugh. Not yet. But the room warmed by a degree. For 10 minutes, no one moved much. Leora mended. Pip sniffed the air. Knox watched his father as if expecting sudden law. Ronan sat by the door like an expensive statue trying to become harmless. Then Pip crept out. One paw. Another. He made it halfway across the rug before losing courage and darting behind Leora's knee. Ronan's hands curled. Leora shook her head once. "Wait." He waited. Pip peeked around her skirt. "Father brought good blanket?" Leora glanced at Ronan. "Did you bring the red blanket with moons?" The Alpha King went still. Merritt, who had been pretending to adjust the lamp, looked at the ceiling. Ronan's voice was flat. "It was in storage." Knox's ears pricked. "Lie. It smells like Father's panic." Pip nodded. "And shopping." Leora put down her needle. "They believe you selected it personally. I approved a household purchase." 17 household purchases? Merritt dropped the lamp snuffer. Ronan looked at him. Merritt became elderly furniture. Pip crept one paw closer to Ronan. "Red blanket is too loud, but soft." Leora translated gently. "Pip says the red blanket is too bright, but soft." Ronan looked as if someone had handed him a priceless treaty written in crumbs. He used it? For 4 minutes. Then Knox accused it of lacking discipline. Knox flattened his ears. It had moons everywhere. Too many moons. Suspicious moons. Ronan's mouth moved. It was gone before it became a smile, but Leora saw it. So did Pip. Father's mouth moved. Knox looked alarmed. "Is he ill?" Leora bent over her mending until her shoulders stopped shaking. By the time Ronan left that night, Pip had not touched him. Knox had not forgiven him. Nobody had embraced or wept or transformed into human shape. But Ronan had sat on the floor for 26 minutes. Pip had come within 6 feet. Knox had called him expensive furniture instead of no. In the language of grieving cubs, that was practically a parade. Ronan paused at the door. Leora stood this time because the cubs were half asleep and the king looked as if leaving cost more than entering. "Miss Vey," he said quietly, "you will tell me if they ask for anything. I will tell you what they need." His eyes held hers. "That is not the same." "No." The answer surprised him. "Good." Leora softened her voice. "What cubs ask for and what they need are cousins, not twins. They may ask for 20 honey breads and the exile of all brushes. They need food, warmth, choice, and someone who does not flinch when they remember pain." Ronan looked toward the blue blanket on the stool. His face closed, then opened just enough for grief to breathe. "And what do I need?" he asked. The question was so quiet, Leora wondered if he meant to speak it. She answered anyway. "A lower chair." He stared at her. Then, for the first time since she arrived, the Alpha King's mouth truly curved. Only slightly. Only for a moment. But Pip, half asleep under the blanket nest, whispered, "Father's face cracked." Knox yawned. "Good. Maybe light gets in." Ronan did not hear the words. Leora did. She watched him leave and thought, not for the last time, that this castle was colder than it wanted to be. The next 3 days rearranged the East Wing without asking permission from the court. Leora did not conquer the nursery. She domesticated it one small absurdity at a time. On the second morning, she replaced the silver dishes with shallow wooden bowls because Pip said silver made milk taste like thunder. Merritt looked troubled by the loss of presentation. Pip drank half a bowl and fell asleep with his nose in the rim, which ended the debate. On the second afternoon, she moved the tall portrait of Ronan's great-grandfather from the nursery wall because Knox claimed the painted Alpha was judging his ears. Merritt protested that the portrait had hung there for 80 years. Knox peed near the frame. The portrait moved. On the third morning, Leora found both cubs asleep inside her empty laundry basket, surrounded by stolen socks. Pip had one sock over his head. Knox had arranged 3 more around the basket like guards. "Why socks?" Leora asked. Pip blinked up at her through the heel. "They smell like walking." Knox lifted his head with grave dignity. "We are studying escape routes." The socks were returned to their owners after negotiation. The laundry maid received 2 honey biscuits as compensation and promised not to ask why one stocking had tiny tooth marks. By the 4th day, the household had stopped whispering that Leora had bewitched the cubs and started whispering that she might survive the week. That was how servants expressed hope. Ronan visited every evening. He never called it visiting. He inspected, he assessed, he reviewed progress. He appeared at the nursery door at precisely the hour when Pip finished his warm milk, and Knox pretended not to enjoy having his paws wiped. Each night, he stood 1 second too long before knocking, as if preparing for battle against a room full of blankets. Each night, Leora made him sit on the floor. The first time she placed a cushion near the door, he looked offended. The second time, he sat on it before she asked. The third time, Pip dragged the cushion closer to the fire and declared, "Father's angry furniture should be warm." Leora translated only the warm part. Ronan looked suspicious anyway. The cubs did not rush to him. That would have been too simple. They circled him as young wolves circled a new log after a storm. Pip sniffed the hem of his coat and fled. Knox inspected one boot and accused it of arrogance. Ronan accepted the judgment with a face fit for treaty signing. On the 5th night, Leora handed Ronan a piece of honey bread. He looked at it. "For me? For them? From you." His hand closed around it too tightly. "They will not take it. Then you will still have offered. A king does not offer food that is refused. A father does." That landed hard. Pip, who was pretending to nap inside the basket, opened one eye. Knox stopped chewing the corner of a blanket. Ronan held the bread as if it had become a blade. Leora did not apologize, not because she wanted to hurt him, but because grief had made everyone in the palace careful around him, and carefulness had become another wall. Cubs could not climb walls made of silence. Ronan lowered the bread to the floor, halfway between himself and the cubs. Then he pulled his hand back and waited. Pip's nose twitched. Knox whispered, "It could be a trap." Pip whispered back, "Bread trap. Good trap. Dignity. Hungry." The smaller cub crept forward on his belly, as if the bread might challenge him to a duel. He reached it, grabbed it, and ran behind Leora's skirt. Ronan's face did not change. His eyes did. Pip ate half the bread, then shoved the other half toward Knox. "Father bread." Knox stared at it. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the older cub took the piece and chewed without looking at Ronan. Ronan's breath left him so quietly that Leora almost missed it. Almost. Pip licked crumbs from his paws. "Father can bring bread again, but not soup." Leora smiled. "They are willing to consider future bread. Soup remains unpopular." Ronan nodded once, as if receiving a military update. "Noted." Knox's ears flicked. He said noted like soup is enemy army. Leora turned her laugh into a cough. The slow progress should have made Ronan easier to be around. It did not. Hope made him more dangerous to her heart than coldness had. When he had been only the Alpha King, he was easy to resist. A cold man in a black coat, handsome and distant, with winter in his eyes. But a man sitting awkwardly on the floor because his cubs needed him lower was another matter. A man learning not to reach too fast. A man who brought honey bread in a silver napkin and pretended it had come from the kitchen by coincidence. That man kept appearing in the nursery. Leora found him in small signs. A repaired window latch before she had requested it. A lower chair placed near the door. 2 new wooden bowls with no silver trim. A note from Merritt saying, "His Majesty has ordered the removal of all judgmental portraits from rooms occupied by minor wolves." Knox approved that decree. Pip asked if the hairbrush could also be outlawed. Leora said no. The hairbrush returned from probation on the 6th day. Knox objected. Pip hid under the rug. Ronan arrived during the argument. He found Leora sitting cross-legged on the floor with the brush in one hand, while both cubs glared from opposite ends of the nursery. Should I ask? The king said. The brush has been granted conditional freedom. Pip's voice came from under the rug. Tyranny. Knox stood on the window seat, tail stiff. It wants our fur. Ronan looked at the brush. Leora had the alarming impression that he was considering arresting it. They need grooming, she said before royal justice could fall on the innocent object. They dislike it. Most useful things begin there. His gaze moved to her. You speak from experience. She lifted the brush. I work for you now. Merritt made a noise near the door and retreated before he could be identified as amused. Ronan's eyes narrowed, but the corner of his mouth betrayed him. Knox saw it. Father likes when Mama bites with words. Pip popped his head from under the rug. Is that flirting? Leora dropped the brush. Ronan looked from her to the cubs. What did they say? They are discussing strategy. Against the brush? Not entirely. He stared at her long enough to make lesser people confess crimes. Leora picked up the brush and changed the subject. If you sit beside me, Knox may allow one stroke. Knox gasped. Betrayal. Pip whispered, maybe Father will be brushed too. Ronan heard the sound and looked wary. Why is the smaller one looking at my hair? Curiosity. That is not reassuring. No one brushed the king that evening. They did brush Knox. It took 30 minutes, 2 honeycrumbs, 1 formal apology from the brush, and Ronan sitting beside Leora with his gloved hand open on the rug. Knox refused to let his father touch him, but he allowed Ronan's hand to remain nearby. That was the important part. Pip, who had claimed he wanted no brushing, fell asleep across Leora's lap halfway through and woke up fluffier than intended. He looked at his own tail in horror. I am a cloud. Knox sniffed him, a dramatic cloud. Ronan's mouth twitched. Leora saw him fight it. She leaned closer and murmured, laughing is allowed, quietly if necessary. He looked at her. Is that another nursery rule? A health recommendation. Pip rolled onto his back with all 4 paws in the air. Ronan laughed. It was small and rough, as if the sound had been stored too long in a locked chest, but it was real. Knox stared at him. Pip froze upside down. Leora held very still. Ronan stopped almost at once, visibly regretting every living witness. Pip whispered, Father made a warm noise. Knox nodded slowly. Suspicious, but not bad. Leora looked down at her hands because Ronan was watching her now, and something in his face was more intimate than a laugh. It was the startled look of a man realizing he had given part of himself away and had not been punished for it. The room smelled of warm fur, honey bread, lamp oil, and thawing fear. Leora thought that if she was not careful, she would begin to want things far beyond her station. Then Pip sneezed himself off her lap. The moment survived, but only barely. The first garden outing happened on the 8th day. Leora had argued for it. Ronan had opposed it with the full force of royal caution. Merritt had stood between them holding a weather report and looking as if he wished to be reassigned to a safer profession, perhaps dragon dentistry. Ronan wanted the cubs kept inside until they were stable. Leora wanted them to remember the sky. The cubs wanted to know whether outside contained mud. It did. The east garden had been closed since the Luna's death. Frost silvered the low hedges. Bare rose canes arched over the path. A stone fountain slept under a skin of ice. At the far end, a white bench faced the winter bear orchard. Ronan stood at the garden gate with 2 guards behind him and the expression of a man watching his heart walk near stairs. Leora knelt beside the cubs. We go slow. No running past the fountain. No biting ornamental hedges. No declaring war on statues. Knox looked offended. Statues started it. Pip sniffed the air. Mud. Mud is not a plan, Leora warned. Pip's tail wagged. Mud is destiny. Ronan looked at her. Why is he wagging like that? Philosophy. That explains nothing. Welcome to Cubs. They entered the garden. For 5 whole minutes, it went beautifully. Knox walked close to Leora's left side, alert but curious. Pip kept stopping to sniff dead leaves and ask whether each one was food, enemy, or hat. Ronan followed 10 paces behind, trying to appear casual and failing with royal intensity. Then Pip discovered the thawed edge of a flower bed. He stepped in. His paw sank. He looked at Leora with wonder. Soft dirt. Pip, she warned. He bounced once. Mud flew. Knox, who had spent the morning claiming he was above childish behavior, launched himself after his brother like a soldier entering glory. Within 30 seconds, both royal wolf cubs were rolling in mud with the enthusiasm of small criminals. Merritt made a sound of despair at the gate. One guard turned away to hide his face. Ronan stood motionless. Leora waited for thunder. It did not come. Instead, the Alpha King said very quietly, "Their mother hated mud." Leora looked at him. His face had gone distant, but not cold. Grief moved through him like a shadow crossing snow. He remembered that Aveline used to claim no respectable wolf should enjoy it, then step in first anyway. In the flower bed, Pip sneezed mud from his nose. Knox announced, "I am respectable dirt." Leora smiled softly. It sounds like she understood strategy. Ronan looked at the cubs. She understood joy better than I did. There was no answer to that which would not sound too small. So Leora gave him the truth. "You are learning." His gaze turned to her. "Too late." Not for them. He looked away first. Pip chose that moment to race toward them, slip, and slide across the path into Ronan's boots. Mud splashed up the king's immaculate black trousers. The garden went silent. Pip lay on his back between Ronan's feet, paws muddy, eyes huge. "I have attacked father." Knox skidded to a halt, equally muddy. "Was it successful?" Leora pressed her lips together. Ronan looked down at the mud on his boots, then at Pip, then at Leora. His expression was terrible. It was also not angry. "What did he say?" "He believes he may have attacked you." He slid. Heroically. Pip wagged from the ground. Ronan bent slowly, picked up the muddy cub with both hands, and held him away from his coat. Pip went limp with shock. Knox's mouth fell open. Leora forgot to breathe. Ronan looked at Pip. "You are filthy." Pip whispered, "Father is holding me." Ronan's hands tightened, not too much, only enough to steady the trembling cub. Pip's tail started wagging. Mud flicked onto Ronan's sleeve. The king did not put him down. Knox took one step closer, then another. Ronan lowered himself to one knee so he was not towering over them. It was awkward. His coat pulled at the shoulder. Mud soaked one knee. He did it anyway. Knox approached with all the caution of a prince entering enemy territory. He sniffed Ronan's hand. Ronan did not move. Knox bumped his muzzle against the king's knuckles and retreated at once, as if embarrassed by affection. Ronan stared at his hand. Leora stared at Ronan. Merritt wept silently at the gate and pretended the wind was responsible. Then Pip licked Ronan's chin. Ronan closed his eyes. The garden held its breath. Pip whispered, "Father tastes like thunder." Knox nodded. "And mud." Leora laughed. She could not help it. Ronan opened his eyes and looked at her over the muddy cub in his hands. For a moment, he did not look like a distant king. He looked like a man kneeling in a ruined flower bed, holding one son while the other pretended not to want the same thing. He seemed shocked by the weight of what had returned to him. Leora's laughter softened. Ronan's face softened too. Only for a breath. But it was enough. After the garden outing, everything became worse in the best possible way. The cubs rediscovered appetite. They also rediscovered crime. Pip began collecting spoons under the window seat. When asked why, he said they were shiny bones. Knox started dragging Ronan's cushions from the floor to Leora's side of the nursery because he believed father should sit closer and stop acting like a cold door. Ronan did not know about the cold door comment until Leora accidentally translated it during dinner. He stared at her. "A cold door." Leora lifted her cup. "A door can open." That was the charitable part. Pip, under the table because he had refused the basket that evening, added, "Father creaks." Leora choked on water. Ronan looked down. "What now?" "Nothing useful." That usually means something accurate. Knox, from beside her chair, said, "Tell him to oil his hinges." Leora put her cup down very carefully. "They are discussing household maintenance." Ronan's eyes narrowed. But the next evening, he came to the nursery with a small wooden toy shaped like a door on hinges. Pip loved it. Knox declared it symbolically heavy. Leora had to leave the room for 1 minute to laugh in the corridor. Ronan followed her out. She was leaning against the wall, one hand over her mouth. I assume the toy was wrong, he said. No, the toy was perfect. That is the problem. I do not understand. You rarely do when you are being sweet. The words escaped before she could stop them. Ronan went still. The corridor outside the nursery was quiet, lit by 2 lamps and the faint blue of winter evening beyond the windows. Down the hall, Merritt argued softly with a footman about whether cub spoons counted as stolen property or developmental enrichment. Ronan looked at Leora as if she had placed a warm object in his hands and he did not know whether it might break. Sweet, he repeated, occasionally, by accident. His mouth almost curved. I see. She should have stepped back. She did not. He should have looked away. He did not. The air between them changed in the narrow corridor. The nursery sounds softened behind the door. Pip barked at the hinge toy. Knox told him to respect metaphor. Leora should have laughed again, but Ronan was closer than before, and the cold cedar scent of him had become familiar. Not safe, exactly. Important. His voice lowered. You are good with them. I have experience. No. More than that. You let them remain wolves without treating that as failure. Leora's chest tightened. It is not failure, it is where they can breathe. Ronan's eyes moved over her face, as if that answer had found a locked room inside him. And me? He asked. It was not the first time he had asked what he needed. It was the first time she heard the question beneath the question. Leora answered carefully. You have been breathing through rules. It works, but not forever. He looked toward the nursery door. Inside, Pip barked with triumph. I do not know how to be what they need. You showed up with bread. You sat on the floor. You let Pip cover you in mud. That is not nothing. His gaze returned to her. And what do you need? That question again. It had a way of undoing her. Leora looked down at her hands. They were rough from work, scented with goat milk soap and honey bread. Not hands for court jewels. Not hands the Alpha King should watch as if they held an answer. Respect, she said. Enough room to do my work. No lies dressed as protection. And personally? Her pulse shifted. Pip saved her by yelping from inside the nursery. The door burst open. Knox stood in the gap, furious. Pip was behind him with the hinge toy stuck on his tail. Emergency, Knox declared. The door bit Pip. Ronan looked at Leora. Leora looked at Ronan. Whatever had almost happened in the corridor stepped back politely. For now. The hinge toy was removed from Pip's tail with minimal scandal. Pip demanded the toy be placed on probation. Knox demanded a trial. Ronan, who had clearly learned too much from Leora, suggested mediation. The cubs stared at him. Pip whispered, Father is becoming Nanny. Knox looked shaken. Power changes wolves. Leora laughed until her eyes watered. Ronan looked offended for nearly 3 seconds. Then he laughed too. The sound reached the nursery ceiling and stayed there like warmth. That was the night Pip fell asleep with one paw on Ronan's boot. Knox pretended not to notice. Ronan noticed so hard he looked in pain. Leora sat beside the fire and mended a torn blanket, pretending not to see him stare at that tiny paw as if it were a crown returned to him. The next morning, Lady Seraphine arrived. She came in white fur, pale blue silk, and the kind of smile that made servants remember urgent errands elsewhere. She was a high-born she-wolf from the Northern Council, elegant, controlled, and scented with snow roses and ambition. Her family had served as royal advisors for generations. Rumor said the council had once considered her as a possible future Luna if Ronan ever remarried. Rumor usually wore perfume. This one smelled like Seraphine. Leora met her in the East Wing sitting room, where Merritt hovered near the tea tray and looked as if he would rather be negotiating with wolves. Seraphine's gaze moved over Leora's plain dress, her simple braid, her work-worn hands. So you are the Omega Nanny? Leora curtsied. Leora Vey, my lady. Yes, that. Merritt looked at the teapot as if hoping it might intervene. From the nursery door came a low growl. Knox stood there, black-gray fur bristling. Pip peeked from behind him, nose wrinkled. Sharp flour, Pip whispered. Knox nodded. Do not eat. Seraphine turned toward them with practiced softness. Your Highnesses, how well you look today. Pip hid behind Knox. Knox showed his teeth. Leora stepped half a pace forward, not blocking the cubs, only reminding them she was there. They are not ready for formal greeting. Seraphine's brows rose. Formal greeting is not a battlefield, Miss Vey. For grieving cubs, many ordinary things are. The noblewoman's smile thinned. How poetic. Ronan entered before Leora could answer. The room changed at once. It always did when he arrived. Seraphine's spine straightened. Merritt nearly saluted with a teacup. The cubs did not run, which Leora privately marked as progress. Ronan's gaze went first to the cubs, then to Leora, then to Seraphine. Lady Seraphine. Seraphine bowed with flawless grace and offered assistance. The council, she claimed, remained concerned that royal cubs needed structure, lineage instruction, and a return to proper form. Knox growled. Proper form bites. Pip whispered. Her shoes have no kindness. Leora folded her hands. Ronan looked at the cubs. They are improving. Seraphine's voice remained smooth as she asked whether they were truly improving. She pointed out their wolf shape, their attachment to an Omega stranger, and the dangerous comfort of a borrowed maternal title. The room went cold. Leora felt the words land, but she did not flinch. She had been called unsuitable before, usually by people who could not soothe a pup through a thunderstorm or tell fever from fear by touch. Ronan's jaw tightened. Leora saw his temper rise and knew it would hurt the cubs if it broke here. She spoke first. They are not confused about their mother. Seraphine looked at her as one might look at a cup speaking from a shelf. No one asked you to interpret royal grief. Pip made a small sound. Knox stepped in front of him. Ronan's voice cut through the room. I did. Seraphine went still. Leora did too. The Alpha King did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Miss Vey will continue. Leora breathed once. Leora answered that the cubs knew their mother was gone. They had not forgotten her. They kept her ribbon and avoided the blue blanket because it carried too much memory. They called Leora Mama because cubs reached for safety before they understood the politics adults attached to words. Punishing that reach would only teach them grief was the last loyal thing left. Pip pressed against her ankle. Knox did not stop growling, but his tail brushed her skirt. Seraphine's eyes sharpened. You speak boldly for a temporary hire. Leora smiled politely. The cubs are not temporary. Merritt stared into the tea tray with open reverence. Ronan looked at Leora as if she had struck a bell only he could hear. Seraphine saw it. That was the problem. She saw too much. Her smile returned, colder now. Of course, I only hope the household remembers the difference between service and presumption. Knox lunged. Not far. Not close enough to harm. Just one sharp step with a snap of teeth toward Seraphine's hem. The room erupted. Pip squeaked. Merritt nearly dropped the tea tray. Seraphine recoiled with a gasp that sounded more insulted than afraid. Ronan moved. Leora moved faster. She crouched between Knox and the room, one hand low, palm open. Knox! The cub trembled with fury. She wants to take Mama. Leora kept her voice steady. No one takes me without me. That stopped him. His ears flicked. Ronan stopped behind her, close enough that she felt his presence like a wall of heat. Seraphine's eyes moved from the cub to Leora to Ronan. Calculation returned where fear should have been. Dangerous attachment, she said softly. Ronan's voice was colder than Leora had ever heard it. Leave, Seraphine bowed. As your majesty commands, she left with dignity. She also left with the story she needed. Leora knew it. Ronan knew it too. After the door closed, Pip crawled into Leora's lap. Knox stood rigid beside her, trying not to shake. Ronan looked at them, then at Leora. She will use this. Yes. She will say you turned them against her. Probably. She will say you overstep. She already did. His hands curled. I will stop it. Leora looked up sharply. How? The question checked him. Good. She could see his first instinct. Orders, walls, removal, protection that looked too much like a locked door. Ronan's eyes narrowed. You think I will do it badly. I think you love like someone preparing for attack. Silence. Pip buried his face in her apron. Knox looked between them and whispered, Mama bit father again. Ronan heard the cub sound, but not the words. His expression shifted, not to anger, but to something more wounded. Leora softened, but did not retreat. If you hide me, she wins. If you silence me, she wins. If you treat me like a problem to manage instead of a person standing beside you, she wins twice. His face closed. That was not good. Ronan looked toward the window, where the winter garden lay pale and quiet. The council will call for review. Then let them review. They will question whether an omega from a border den house should influence royal cubs. Then answer honestly. He looked back at her. You make it sound simple. No. I make it sound necessary. Knox pressed closer to her side. Pip whispered, Father smells like storm again. Ronan turned away before Leora could answer. Merritt, he called. The butler appeared in the doorway with the speed of a man who had been listening from a respectful distance. Your Majesty. He ordered that no visitors enter the East Wing without approval and that Miss Vey remain inside until further notice. Leora stood. The cubs startled. Ronan did not look at her. That made it worse. For her safety, he added. There it was, the locked door. Merritt looked at Leora with apology in every wrinkle. Knox growled. No. Pip whimpered. Mama stays with us? Leora kept her voice calm for them. I am here tonight. Ronan's shoulders tightened. He left the room before she could say anything that would make the cubs more afraid. That was wise of him. It was also cowardly. Both things could be true. The East Wing became a palace inside a palace after that. It had its own fires, its own staircases, and its own silence. Guards appeared outside the main doors before supper. They stood with polished boots and stiff necks, pretending they did not hear two wolf cubs drag every cushion in the nursery into one corner. Leora knew the sound of frightened nesting. Cubs did it when storms came too close, when adults argued over their heads, and when a door had closed without anyone explaining whether it would open again. Knox hauled the blue blanket to the hearth with grim purpose. Pip seized the corner, tripped over his paws, and vanished under it with only his tail showing. From beneath the blanket came a muffled claim that the disappearance had been tactical. Leora sat on the floor and turned grooming into a court proceeding. The comb was introduced as a suspect with no history of biting. The towel served as royal witness. The left curtain was accused of touching Pip's tail without permission. By the time Merritt arrived with supper, both cubs had clean paws, combed fur, and the pleased exhaustion of judges after a difficult trial. Merritt looked at the hairbrush lying on a cushion. Is the brush being detained? Pending further investigation, Leora informed him. The old butler nodded as if this explained several years of court politics. Supper brought barley stew, soft bread, roasted apples, and the first peaceful meal the cubs had shared since the funeral month. Pip offered Leora a damp piece of roll and called it Mama first. Merritt's face changed at the word. He had known the queen, who was gone. Leora broke the roll into 3 pieces and told the cubs that Pack shared. That night behaved less like a romantic tale than a laundry disaster with royal witnesses. Pip refused to sleep until Leora checked behind the screen for sneaky chairs. Knox refused to admit he was tired while swaying on his paws. The fire popped. The wind scraped the window glass. Somewhere deep in the palace, a clock chimed with the smug patience of a machine that had never tucked in a wolf cub. Leora made a bed on the nursery sofa. Pip slept with his head on her ankle. Knox pretended to guard the door until his chin drooped onto her cloak. Only then did Leora let anger settle fully in her chest. Ronan had called his order safety. To her, it felt like a locked door with a kinder label. Near midnight, he entered without crown, cloak, or polished mask. Snow dampened his hair. Tiredness lay across his face in a way no royal tailor could hide. He saw the sleeping cubs, the cushioned nest, and the detained brush. "Should I ask?" he murmured. "Only if you are prepared for a complex legal history." The almost smile vanished when he looked at her. He admitted he had handled the situation badly. Seraphine had allies, he explained, and the council would twist Leora's sudden importance into something ugly. They would say an Omega had taken advantage of royal grief. Leora did not rescue him from the truth. Locking her in the East Wing made him look afraid because he was afraid. For once, Ronan did not deny it. That honesty changed the room more than any apology could have. He sat near the hearth, where the cubs could see him if they woke, and where Leora could tell him to leave if she chose. The silence held firelight, cub breathing, wet wool, cinnamon, and the blue ribbon beside Nox's paw. Ronan told her that Queen Aveline had tied that ribbon on Nox when he was declaring war on furniture. She had said princes needed banners for such campaigns. The memory made his voice rough, but it also made Leora smile. "She would have liked you," he said. Leora answered lightly, because the tenderness in the room was becoming dangerous. "Then she had excellent taste." His quiet laugh woke Nox only halfway. The little wolf opened his eyes, saw his father by the fire, and did not hide. He touched the blue ribbon with one paw and slept again. Ronan looked away too fast for pride, but not fast enough to hide the shine in his eyes. Morning tried to ruin the truce with a council notice, 3 unsuitable breakfast trays, and Pip's discovery that porridge could be launched with surprising accuracy. 1 spoonful struck the nursery door. Another landed on Merritt's shoe. The third hit Ronan's cuff as he entered in black court dress. Everyone froze. Pip stared at the cuff with the horror of a criminal who had struck the judge. Ronan examined the porridge, then announced that this was improvement because last week jam had reached the ceiling. Merritt nearly inhaled his own dignity. The council notice accused Leora of irregular influence over royal minors. Leora read the phrase while Pip tried to lick porridge from his ear. It was hard to feel like a dangerous manipulator while supervising a moving breakfast. Ronan wanted to refuse the hearing. Leora told him refusal would look like hiding. When he tried to protect her by force of will, she made the line clear. If he locked her away again, she would walk out herself. The cubs went still. Ronan heard the warning in their silence. He swallowed his pride and listened. "Then stand beside me in public," Leora told him. His face changed. He understood the strategy, but he also understood the trust inside it. "I can do that," he answered. Preparation for council review became the least dignified military campaign in Ashvale history. Merritt brought brushes. Knox inspected them for enemy loyalties. Pip attempted to hide one under a cushion, then forgot which cushion and accused the chair of theft. Leora polished their paws with a damp cloth, because royal cubs could not enter the West Hall smelling like hearth ash and porridge rebellion. Ronan tried to assist. He failed at ribbons. The first ribbon came out crooked. The second slid over Knox's eye. The third somehow attached itself to Ronan's own thumb. Knox endured this with the grim patience of a soldier watching a king lose a war against cloth. Leora finally stepped in and retied the blue ribbon at Knox's neck. Like this. Ronan leaned close to watch, too close. His shoulder brushed hers, and the scent of cedar, snow, and restrained alpha warmth wrapped around her. Leora's fingers paused for half a heartbeat. Pip noticed. Of course Pip noticed. Pip noticed crumbs under locked doors. "Father smells less storm," he announced. Ronan straightened so fast the ribbon nearly went with him. Leora focused on Knox's fur with professional intensity. "That is because His Majesty is learning not to thunder indoors." Merritt made the mistake of inhaling tea. The butler survived, but only just. By noon, they looked presentable from a distance. From a close distance, Knox had a blue ribbon, and Pip had one pale ear that refused to lie flat. Ronan had a faint porridge mark on one cuff. Leora had lint on her skirt from kneeling in a towel nest. It would have to do. The West Hall smelled of wax, cold stone, perfume, and judgment. Long windows threw white winter light across a floor polished enough to reflect every nervous foot. Nobles gathered beneath banners of old victories. Counselors stood in careful clusters. Their jewels winked like small, expensive eyes. Leora entered with Ronan on one side and the cubs on the other. She felt the attention hit. It was not new. Low-born Omegas always knew the shape of a room turning to measure them. But this room did it with titles, whispers, and velvet. Pip pressed against her leg. Nox walked stiffly, head high, ribbon bright. Ronan did not touch Leora, not yet, but he matched her pace, and he did not move ahead as if she were staff trailing behind him. That mattered. Lady Seraphine waited near the council dais in silver silk. She looked flawless, which Leora immediately distrusted. No one who had spent even 10 minutes with frightened cubs stayed flawless unless they had avoided doing anything useful. Seraphine's eyes moved over Leora's plain dress and settled on the cubs. "Your Majesty," she greeted Ronan. "How relieving to see the princes outside the nursery." Pip's ears tilted. Nox muttered, "She smells like pinched flowers." Leora kept her face calm through heroic effort. Ronan heard only a low cub sound, but he saw Leora's mouth twitch. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. Seraphine extended one elegant hand toward Pip. "Come, little prince." Pip moved behind Leora's skirt so quickly that the fabric snapped. Seraphine's smile remained, but it tightened at the edges. "Still shy," she observed. Nox looked up at Leora. "Not shy. Sensible." Leora covered a cough. Ronan's mouth compressed. Counselor Brevin, a square man with a beard like a legal document, struck the floor once with his staff. "This review concerns the welfare of the royal heirs and the unusual attachment formed with Miss Vey." Leora heard the trap. Unusual attachment sounded like a disease. She stepped forward before Ronan could answer for her. "The attachment is not unusual among grieving cubs who have been isolated. It is sudden, yes, but sudden is not the same as false." Several counselors murmured. Brevin peered at her. "You claim expertise? I claim experience. With royal heirs? With frightened young wolves." That landed better than she expected. A few older nobles shifted. Even proud houses had nurseries. Even polished families had teeth marks on table legs they pretended were antique distressing. Seraphine floated forward. "Experience is valuable, Miss Vey. Yet we must ask why the princes accepted you within minutes after refusing every appointed attendant for months." There it was. The question had a blade tucked inside it. Leora looked down at Pip, then Nox. She could invent something grand. She could say her methods were unique. She could dress humility in ribbons and sell it as mystery. Instead, she chose the truth. "Because I sat down." The hall went quiet. Seraphine blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Leora repeated that she had sat down. She had not reached, commanded, or demanded that they behave like princes to make adults comfortable. She had smelled of bread smoke, border wool, and other cubs. More importantly, she had given them room to decide she was not a threat. Pip nodded so hard his ear flopped. Nox added, "And she arrested the brush." Leora breathed in through her nose. "Do not laugh in council. Do not laugh in council." Ronan made a sound that might have been a cough or the death of royal composure. Brevin frowned. "Arrested the what?" Leora folded her hands. A grooming tool had lost their trust. Merritt, standing near the wall, looked at the ceiling with an expression of spiritual discipline. Seraphine's smile sharpened. "This is charming, but charm does not answer the concern. These cubs call you Mama, do they not?" The word moved through the hall. Mama. It sounded sweet from a cub's mouth. From Seraphine, it sounded like evidence. Leora felt Ronan tense beside her. She knew he was about to step in, and she also knew he must not. Not yet. "They do," she answered. A few nobles gasped softly. Someone near the back whispered a prayer. Seraphine turned that reaction into a weapon. "Then you admit you have encouraged them to replace their dead mother?" Pip whimpered. Nox's fur rose. Ronan's alpha presence surged so fast the candles trembled. Leora did not look at him. She crouched beside the cubs in the middle of the West Hall, velvet and jewels be cursed. Her knees touched the cold floor. "Listen to me," she told them, keeping her voice low. "No one replaces your mother. Pip pressed his nose into her palm. Knox's eyes shone, but he did not look away. Leora continued, "A heart is not a chair at supper. Love does not need someone to stand up before another can sit down." The hall had gone very still. She stroked one hand over Pip's head, then set her fingers near Knox's ribbon without touching until he leaned into her. If they called her Mama because the word felt safe, Leora would hold it gently. She would not steal what belonged to Queen Aveline. She would help them remember their mother without turning memory into punishment. Ronan made a rough sound behind her. This time, everyone heard it. Leora rose. She expected Seraphine to retreat. Seraphine did not. Proud people rarely knew when a room had turned. They only noticed when the floor disappeared. Seraphine called the answer beautiful, convenient, and suspiciously fond of disorder. Then she listed mud in the winter garden, porridge on royal clothing, and furniture trials in the nursery as if they were treason. Leora looked at Ronan's cuff. The porridge mark remained faintly visible. Ronan followed her gaze. For one terrible second, the Alpha King and the Omega Nanny stood before the council and silently considered whether breakfast had become legal evidence. Pip chose that moment to help. It was progress, he announced with pride. Most adults heard a determined yip. Leora heard the whole sentence. Ronan, who had learned enough to read the situation, covered his mouth. Counselor Brevin stared at the cub. What did he mean by that? Ronan lowered his hand. His face was solemn enough to command armies. Last week, the jam reached the ceiling. The hall broke. Not loudly. These were nobles. They did not burst like tavern patrons, but laughter ran through them in startled waves. A duchess hid behind her fan. One young lord turned purple. Merritt abandoned the ceiling and studied the floor. Even Brevin's beard seemed to soften. Seraphine's jaw tightened. The laugh did what Leora could not have done with argument. It made the cubs real. Not symbols. Not heirs in a crisis report. Just two little wolves who had survived grief and were learning to be ridiculous again. Ronan stepped forward. The laughter faded at once. He did not use the dace. He did not raise his voice. My sons have been silent for months, he said. Not because they lacked discipline, because this palace asked them to grieve neatly. No one moved. Ronan's eyes passed over the council, the nobles, the banners, and finally rested on Leora. Miss Vey did not steal their loyalty. She earned their trust by doing what I failed to do. She entered their pain without demanding that it look royal. Leora's throat tightened. He was not finished. She will remain as their guardian nanny, with my full protection and authority. Anyone who suggests she has used improper influence will bring proof to me directly, not whispers to my hall. Seraphine's smile had gone cold. Your Majesty, protection is one matter, elevation is another. Ronan looked at her. The hall remembered at once that he was still Alpha King. Then let us be clear, he said. I am not ashamed to stand beside her. The words settled over the room like a banner being raised. Leora could not breathe properly. This was not a declaration of love. Not exactly. It was too soon for that, and he was too honorable to turn her into a spectacle before she had chosen him. But it was public. It was deliberate. It was the door opening. Pip looked between them, then whispered to Knox, Father did public. Knox whispered back, Public has many shoes. Pip nodded. He did shoes. Leora pressed her lips together. Ronan heard enough of the cub sounds to suspect disaster. His eyes flicked toward her with a question. She shook her head slightly. Not now. If the Alpha King learned that his public courage had been reduced to doing shoes, the council might have to adjourn for reasons of dignity. Brevin struck his staff again, though less sharply this time. The council will record His Majesty's statement. Seraphine was not beaten. Leora could see it in the lift of her chin. But she had lost the room for the day, and sometimes a day was enough to save a family. The review ended with more bowing than necessary. Nobles approached in cautious clusters. Some offered polite congratulations. Some pretended they had never doubted her. One baroness asked Leora what brand of comb had passed the brush investigation. because her own grandson had declared war on bathwater. Leora answered with complete seriousness. Ronan stood nearby, listening as if comb selection had become state policy. Pip leaned against his boot. Knox sat close enough to Leora for the blue ribbon to brush her skirt. It was the first time the four of them looked like a unit in public. Not a perfect one. Pip tried to eat a tassel from Brevon's ceremonial sash. Knox gave a low growl at a statue because it held a spear in what he considered an irresponsible manner. Ronan had to apologize to a countess after Pip sneezed into her fur muff. The countess, who had 5 sons, only patted Pip's head and told Ronan that royal problems were finally becoming relatable. By the time they escaped the West Hall, Leora was tired down to her bones. The palace corridors smelled warmer on the way back. Or perhaps she did. Ronan walked beside her again. His hand hung near hers, not touching. The space between them had become a living thing. Pip trotted ahead with his tail lifted. Knox moved beside Leora, pretending not to lean. At the turn toward the east wing, Ronan stopped. The guards were gone. Leora noticed at once. He noticed her noticing. No more walls, he told her. She held his gaze. No more cages called safety. No more cages. That should have been enough. But Pip had been quiet for almost 3 minutes, which was always dangerous. He looked up at his father. Can we keep her? Ronan's face went blank with panic. Knox closed his eyes, deeply pained by his brother's lack of political timing. Leora lifted both brows. The Alpha King, who had faced assassins, border lords, council hearings, and porridge artillery, appeared to lose all strategy before one pale gray cub. Miss Vey, Ronan began, then stopped. Pip pressed on. Like a good blanket, but person. Knox groaned. You make everything worse. Warm worse, Pip argued. Leora should have helped Ronan. She did not. She was tired. She was still hurt. She was also curious to see whether a king could climb out of a hole dug by his own child. Ronan looked at her with an expression caught between apology and longing. I would not presume to keep you, he said at last. Good answer. Then he ruined it beautifully. But I would ask you to stay. The corridor changed. It was still stone, torchlight, and winter drafts. Yet for Leora, everything narrowed to Ronan's face and the rare uncertainty in his eyes. He was asking 2 things. One was about the cubs. The other waited behind it, careful and unnamed. Leora touched Knox's head, then Pip's. She let the warmth of them steady her. I will stay as their guardian nanny, she replied, with fair pay, clear authority, and the right to tell you when you are being royal in the worst possible way. Merritt, who had appeared from nowhere as all good butlers did, made a small approving sound. Ronan's eyes warmed. Agreed. Pip bounced. Mama stays. Knox allowed himself one tail wag. Only one. Royal dignity had limits, but they were improving. The days after the review did not become peaceful. They became alive, which was louder and far more useful. Leora opened the nursery windows each morning until old palace air gave way to snow, pine smoke, and butter from the kitchens below. She changed the schedule from royal discipline to den rhythm. Movement came before lessons. Trust came before grooming. Formal greetings came after breakfast, because no creature under the moon should bow before porridge. Pip thrived like chaos, had finally received permission. He carried letters in his mouth and delivered half of them to the wrong people. Once, he slid across the polished council corridor so fast that a footman saluted him from pure panic. Knox healed more quietly. He watched first, tested second, and accepted comfort last, as if every kindness had to pass inspection. Ronan learned to ask before reaching for either cub. The first attempt nearly defeated him. A king could command armies, but asking a small wolf whether he might sit beside him made sweat gather under his collar. Knox stared at him for a long moment, then shifted 2 inches to the left. Ronan sat as if those 2 inches were a treaty. Leora saw the look on his face when Knox leaned against his boot. It was not victory. It was relief so naked that she had to pretend to fold towels. The palace noticed the change. Servants no longer froze when the cubs passed. Merritt began carrying dried apple in his pocket and pretending surprise when Pip ambushed him. The east wing smelled of bread, clean fur, ink, and whatever had last been rescued from under a cabinet. Not every whisper softened. One afternoon near the linen room, Leora heard two maids wonder whether a low Omega had been clever enough to profit from royal grief. She kept walking with clean blankets in her arms and her face calm. Border girls learned early that reacting gave gossip a chair and tea. The cubs knew anyway. Knox pressed against her calf the moment she entered the nursery, and Pip offered to bite someone with deep sincerity. Leora refused all biting, including tiny biting. When Ronan arrived and understood what had happened, he did not roar through the corridors. He sat on the rug beside her, picked up a blanket corner, and folded it badly. Pip judged the result with one offended sneeze. Ronan accepted the criticism. Knox dragged the blanket away for repairs. Leora laughed, and the hurt inside her loosened because the king had chosen to stay on the floor instead of turning her pain into a royal decree. The first true public test came with the moon market. Every winter, Ashvale opened the lower courtyard for bakers, craftsmen, musicians, and pack families from the valleys. The people would see the cubs. They would see Leora with them. They would decide, in the quiet way people decided such things, whether the palace was healing or only performing. Lady Seraphine understood that perfectly. She sent 2 silver collars that morning, stiff with moonstones and tiny engraved crowns. Her note praised discipline over softness. Pip tried to climb into the velvet box, while Knox treated the collars as traps with expensive manners. Leora chose 2 soft wool ties instead, cut from an old border shawl. One was blue-gray for Knox. One was pale green for Pip. It was pale green for Pip. They looked humble against royal fur, but the cubs stood easier in them. Ronan studied the discarded silver. "You are making a statement." "I am preventing chafing," Leora told him. He looked at the comfortable wool and then at his sons. Both can be true. The moon market glittered under a pale afternoon sky. Lanterns hung from red awnings. The air smelled of chestnuts, beeswax, wool dye, frying onions, and snow. At first, the crowd frightened the cubs. Pip lowered his tail. Knox pressed so close to Leora that his ribbon brushed her skirt. Ronan crouched before the watching market and promised they would leave if it became too much. That mattered. The king was no longer dragging them toward bravery. He was walking at their pace. Honey cakes helped. So did a baker who offered Leora the first piece for royal safety testing. Pip accepted his own piece with the courage of a warrior facing frosting. Knox waited until Ronan tasted one too, then ate with solemn dignity and crumbs on his wool tie. The crowd softened. People smiled at the cubs instead of pitying them. Then Ronan bought a clockwork toy bird, and dignity fled under a cider cart. The bird clicked, hopped, and escaped. Pip adored it. Knox declared silent war on it. For 3 frantic minutes, the Alpha King, the Omega Nanny, 2 bakers, Merritt, and half the courtyard pursued a metal bird while pretending this was not state business. The bird finally sprang out and landed in front of Seraphine's silver shoes. Seraphine looked at the straw on Ronan's sleeve, the honey on Pip's whiskers, and the basket of gingerbread in Leora's hands. Her smile sharpened. She made one careful remark about common amusements. Leora answered that running was useful when a bird fled under cider. Someone snorted behind a pastry stall. Seraphine's eyes turned cold, and she warned Leora that palace favorites could become lessons very quickly. Ronan moved, but Leora touched his sleeve first. It was only 2 fingers on black wool, yet the entire courtyard saw it. Leora faced Seraphine and spoke in the even voice she had used on frightened wolves and arrogant men. She said border girls learned which smiles carried warmth and which carried frost. She said the princes were not ornaments, His Majesty was not a prize, and she was not frightened of women who mistook discomfort for defeat. For a breath, the courtyard held still. Then Pip sneezed honey onto Seraphine's silver hem. The timing was so perfect that witnesses later gave the moon credit. Seraphine left with her pride bleeding invisibly behind her. and Pip spent the walk back insisting he had not meant to become a weapon. That evening, after the cubs fell asleep near the nursery fire, Leora stepped onto the east balcony. The courtyard below still glowed with lanterns. Music drifted upward in broken pieces, and the palace no longer felt like a tomb trying to remember laughter. Ronan joined her without his formal coat. There was straw in his hair from the market battle. Leora let him remain unaware for one satisfying moment before telling him. He removed the straw with the solemn betrayal of a man who had addressed 3 guildmasters while looking harvested. The shared laughter faded into a quieter warmth. He told her he had meant what he said in the council hall. He was not ashamed to stand beside her, not as the cub's nanny, not as an Omega, and not as the woman who had arrested a hairbrush. Leora warned him not to mistake gratitude for love. Ronan answered with the steadiness of a man who had already questioned himself in the dark and found the truth waiting. I love you, Leora. The words were quiet, and they changed the cold air around them. She looked back through the balcony door at the sleeping cubs, then at the man beside her. She cared for his sons. She cared for the strange, drafty, over-polished palace more than she had planned. And she cared for him, not because he was a king, but because he had learned to ask. She took his hand. I love you too. Ronan closed his fingers around hers with careful strength. The moment might have become elegant if Knox had not appeared in the doorway and asked whether they were doing mate eyes. Pip stumbled out under his brother's belly, still half asleep, and announced that father smelled like warm storm. Ronan muttered an ancient legal term that was probably a curse. Leora laughed until her eyes watered, and the cubs settled on the balcony around them like highly inconvenient witnesses. Ronan did not let go of her hand. It was not enough for Ashvale. The kingdom found out 3 days later during the Moon Oath gathering because romance in a palace had the privacy of a dropped tray. The gathering was not a wedding. It was an old winter rite where pack families renewed bonds before the full moon. People brought candles, tied ribbons to the courtyard trees, and shared sweet bread under the open sky. The king was expected to speak. The royal heirs were expected to appear for a brief blessing. Leora expected to stand with the attendants. Ronan had other plans. She learned this when Merritt delivered a gown to her room. It was not white, silver, or anything that tried to make her look like a replacement queen. It was deep green wool with fine embroidery at the cuffs, practical enough for winter and elegant enough to make her stare. There was a note on top. Stand where you choose. I hope it is beside me. Leora sat on the edge of the bed and read the line 3 times. Then Pip burst in carrying one of her slippers. Ceremony shoe, he announced. Knox followed with the other slipper in his mouth and an expression of extreme burden. Leora looked between them. Why are my slippers in your mouths? Pip dropped his with pride. Helping. Helping. Knox placed his down more carefully. He stole them. I made it organized. That is not the same as helping. Pip wagged. It became helping. By the time Leora dressed, the room looked as if a small storm had approved her wardrobe. Pip tried to wear a sash. Knox corrected the angle of his wool tie 3 times. Merritt arrived to escort them and found Leora crouched on the floor, negotiating with a cub who believed ceremony required bringing the detained hairbrush. The brush has history, Pip insisted. The brush has parole, Leora replied. Merritt folded his hands. Perhaps the brush may observe from the nursery. Knox nodded. House arrest. That settled it. The courtyard was full when they arrived. Lanterns hung from every arch. Snow lay in bright ridges along the walls. The moon rose above the eastern tower, round and pale, turning breath into silver mist. Hundreds of faces turned toward the royal steps. Leora felt the old instinct to step aside. Servants stood at the edge. Omegas of lower houses stood behind their alphas unless invited forward. Women like her survived by knowing where the room expected them to be. Pip pressed his shoulder against her leg. Knox did the same on her other side. They did not push. They waited. Her choice. Ronan stood at the top of the steps in black and winter blue. No crown tonight, only the moon-marked clasp at his throat. His gaze found hers through the crowd. He did not beckon like a king. He held out his hand like a man. The courtyard saw it. So did Seraphine, standing near the council with a face carved from frost. Leora climbed the steps. Every step was quiet, but each one felt louder than applause. Pip bounced beside her, nearly tripping on the second step. Knox pretended this did not happen and then tripped on the third. The crowd made a soft, fond sound. Ronan helped Knox recover with perfect dignity. "No one saw," he murmured. Knox looked at the hundreds of people below. "Everyone saw. Then, everyone saw you recover." Knox considered that and accepted it. Leora reached Ronan's side. He took her hand. Not hidden, not brief, not explained away. The murmur that moved through the courtyard was immense. Ronan waited until it faded. Then he spoke. "Ashvale has mourned with my sons and me. For that, we owe you gratitude." His voice carried across stone and snow. Pip sat on Leora's foot. She did not move. "But grief is not the only bond we honor tonight," Ronan continued. "We honor the hands that rebuild. We honor the patience that sits on cold floors. We honor the courage that enters a silent room and does not demand applause for bringing warmth." Leora's throat tightened. He turned slightly, facing her before the entire gathering. "Leora Vey came to this palace as guardian to my sons. She became their safe place by earning every inch of their trust. She became mine by telling me the truth when I least wanted to hear it." Pip looked up at Knox. "This is public bigger than shoes." Knox whispered, "Be quiet. Father is doing important embarrassment." Leora's mouth trembled. Ronan's thumb brushed her hand. "Tonight I ask her, before my pack and my people, to stand beside me not because rank permits it, but because my heart has chosen it." The courtyard vanished. There was only Ronan, his warm hand, the smell of snow and cedar, and the impossible softness in his eyes. He did not say claim. He did not say command. He asked. "Leora," he said, "will you stay with us as my beloved, my partner, and, when you are ready, my queen?" For one heartbeat, she could not speak. Pip helped. "Say yes," he whispered loudly. Knox hissed. "That is not how proposals work. It is if they are slow." Someone in the front row laughed. Then another person did. The laughter spread, warm and tender, breaking the grandness just enough for Leora to breathe. She looked at the two cubs who had called her mama before she had earned the courage to accept how much she wanted the word. She looked at Merritt, who was pretending not to cry. She looked at the crowd, at the Omegas watching with startled hope, at the nobles trying to decide how history would phrase this. Finally, she looked at Ronan. "Yes," Leora answered, "but I reserve the right to keep correcting your ribbon knots." The courtyard erupted. It was not polite applause. It was cheers, laughter, howls, and the stamping of boots on stone. The sound rose into the winter night and struck the towers. Ronan smiled like a man set free. Pip leapt in a circle and crashed into Knox. Knox maintained dignity for exactly 1 second before tumbling into the snow with his brother. Merritt produced a handkerchief and lost all war with his eyes. Seraphine left before the sweet bread was served. No one followed her. Ronan bent to Leora, but stopped just short, still asking, always asking now. Leora rose on her toes and kissed him before the entire pack. It was not a long kiss. There were cubs, counselors, and at least 12 elderly aunties present. But it was warm, sure, and public enough to make the moon feel like a witness. Pip gasped. Maid eyes became mouth. Knox covered his face with both paws. The crowd laughed again. Leora rested her forehead against Ronan's for one breath. "Your sons are narrating our romance," she whispered. "I have noticed. Can kings ban that?" "I fear they outrank me," she laughed, and he kissed her hand because the first kiss had apparently not destroyed his manners. Later, when the speeches ended and the sweetbread appeared, the gathering dissolved into celebration. People came forward to offer blessings. Some bowed to Ronan, some bowed to Leora. A few older Omegas clasped her hands with tears in their eyes and said nothing at all. Those silent greetings moved her most. They knew. They knew what it meant to be chosen publicly, not hidden kindly. They knew what it meant for an alpha king to ask instead of take, and for an omega woman to answer with humor still intact. Pip ate too much sweetbread and had to be carried. Knox pretended he did not want to be carried, then fell asleep leaning against Ronan's leg. Ronan lifted him with practiced care. Knox woke enough to grumble, then tucked his nose under his father's chin. Lyora carried Pip. He was heavier than he looked, all warm fur and crumbs. As they walked back through the palace, the corridors no longer seemed to measure her. They opened. Merritt walked behind them, holding the ceremonial candles and the dignity of the household in both hands. "Your Majesty," he said, "the detained hairbrush remains in the nursery." Pip lifted his head from Leora's shoulder. "Brush missed wedding?" "It was not a wedding," Knox mumbled from Ronan's arms. "Almost wedding." Ronan looked at Leora over the cubs. There was laughter in his eyes, but also promise. "Almost," he agreed. The east wing fire was burning when they returned. Someone had placed fresh flowers on the mantel, though no one admitted it. The room smelled of pine, wax, and home. Not palace, not duty, home. Leora set Pip onto the rug. He rolled onto his back at once, paws in the air, utterly defeated by celebration. Knox slid from Ronan's arms and went to the shelf where the blue ribbon box now sat beside Queen Aveline's small portrait. He touched the box with his nose, then returned to Leora. "Mama stays," he said. This time the words did not startle her. They filled her. She knelt and opened her arms. Knox stepped into them with all the careful pride of a prince allowing comfort. Pip crawled over both of them and landed sideways. Ronan stood above them for a moment, watching as if he still could not believe the room was his. Leora looked up. "Are you joining us, or will you stand there looking tragically handsome until someone writes a ballad?" Merritt, halfway to the door, paused. Ronan removed his formal coat. "I dislike ballads." "Then sit." He sat. The cubs immediately rearranged themselves so that everyone was slightly uncomfortable, but no one could move without offending someone. Pip's tail lay across Ronan's wrist. Knox's head rested on Leora's knee. Ronan's shoulder touched hers. For a while, no one spoke. The fire cracked. Snow brushed the window. Somewhere far below, the last cheers from the courtyard faded into the night. Leora leaned into Ronan's shoulder. He turned his face toward her hair and breathed in, not possessive, not startled, simply grateful. Pip opened one eye. "Pack fixed?" Knox answered before either adult could. "Mostly." Pip yawned. "Mostly is good." Leora smiled into the firelight. Mostly was very good. Mostly left room for crooked ribbons, suspicious furniture, and council meetings interrupted by stolen quills. It also left room for a king who still needed reminders not to build walls when his heart got frightened. Mostly left room for grief and laughter to share the same hearth. Mostly left room for love to grow at the pace trust allowed. Ronan's hand found hers under the blanket. This time, with the cubs sleeping between them and the whole kingdom already aware, he did not need to ask. Leora laced their fingers together. Outside, the winter moon shone over Ashvale's towers. Inside, the Alpha King, the Omega Nanny, and two wolf cubs who had refused the world slept in a warm, ridiculous pile on the nursery rug. The detained hairbrush observed from the shelf. For once, it caused no trouble at all. Thank you for listening. If this story grabbed your heart, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss our next story. We'll see you in the next one.